So Sergio, this is about responsible leadership. How would you describe your leadership style, and how did it evolve over time, from a trader to a CEO? I mean, just how would you describe your leadership style?
Well, actually, when you start as a trader, the leadership style at that time on a trading floor was not something that nowadays would be recognized as acceptable. And for sure, was something completely different, because at the end of the day, when you are in a trading environment, you have to look for your own position. You have to look for the interest of the bank and your own interest, and looking at the interest of of course the clients that you are facing, but the rest of the environment, at best is neutral, and in many cases are enemies. So you need to, and so how you treat relationship with different people is completely different than when you start to evolve into a managerial role. Because one thing is like in sports, there are a lot of analogies, like playing sports as a tennis players. You play against somebody else when you play in a team. When you go up in managing some things, you go from being a single player, potentially, to be a captain on the pitch and still having to play, but with a completely different responsibilities. Until then, you may move and retire and become the manager of the team. And so there is a natural evolution in which the kind of reaction, emotional reactions, personal reactions, the way you look at and interact with people changes completely. So there is a function of both responsibility coming from the job, but also as you mature, because of course when you are 25 or 30, you have a kind of different emotional behaviors than when you have a couple of gray hairs. And of course then you learn all these things, and you learn how to adapt and take in consideration the human dimension. That's very important, because at the end of the day, leadership is to understand, how to, when to intervene, how to intervene, and how to let other people, take ownership and responsibilities for what they do. Leadership doesn't mean to dictate. Leadership means to potentially be able to make yourself redundant. The ultimate success for a leader is to be replaceable, and the organization should continue to work like you were there. That's the ultimate success.
But as a leader at UBS, it strikes me, reading about what you've done and talking to you, you were trying to change both culture and strategy at the same time. Strategic changes in terms of what, the blend of businesses, and cultural changes, as well. So not quite leaving hands off the organization to do what they might do, but steering it through very difficult times. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah.
There's this quote about how culture eats strategy for business every morning. You were changing both.
Yeah, but eventually, in a completely different way, because when you talk about a strategy, then you need to clearly direct and give directions, right? When you talk about cultural evolutions, you need to get people to embrace. You can't dictate a culture, because the culture is not just so on the strategic part was at least for me clear that we had a unsustainable situation coming out of the financial crisis. My predecessor helped to stabilize the bank. We were in a path of mild recovery, and then we had that incident, that fraud, that was a major setback. And it was quite clear to me that at that point in time, the lack of financial performance would be something very difficult to accept any longer for our shareholders. Of course, we could have said, give us another chance. I'm new, give me a chance. but frankly, that was probably a stretch. We could have tried, but was a stretch. The second element was three factors. The second factor was a vision and a view that post-financial crisis regulation would change the financial services industry for good. Actually, we were quite gloomy. By the way, I'm not against regulation, and tougher regulation on banking is necessary to avoid the mistakes done by our industry. I will talk maybe later on about the fact where we stand today, which is a completely different situation. But in any case, regulation would change banking, and therefore the way we were organized and the vast majority of our peers, almost our peers, were running their banking business was no longer sustainable, or was no longer something that would be sustainable going forward as regulation would be implemented. So many people believed this regulation will never come or will never fully implement it. We took the view that this was serious and would change banking. The third element was a view that the macroeconomic environment, already in 2011 and 2012, was not likely to be a constructive environment in terms of growth in the world, GDP growth, interest rates level, and therefore the so-called tailwinds of the economy helping you to recover out of a restructuring would not be there. So in a nutshell, we took a decision that we needed to go back and say, who are we today? What are we good at? And what are we not good at? And realize that banking, while we have a banking license, it doesn't mean that you have to do the same thing there is nothing like a bank that can do everything everywhere in the world. And therefore, we needed to pick out what we are good at. It was very clear that we were, and we are still today, the leading bank in terms of wealth management. So management and having clients and trusting their assets with us, and so we have $2 trillion of clients' assets, and we are the largest and more global wealth manager in the world, and so I thought this is the starting position. The second starting position, we are the largest bank and most successful bank in Switzerland. And we had a very good investment bank in some areas, and in many other areas we were not so good. And we have a good asset management operation, and not very large, but good. So I say, look, just focus on what we are good at. And address also, and happen to be what we are good at was very much in line with a new model of banking, so capital light and focus on client serving activities. So I decided to basically change the way we were allocating the capital of the bank from 2/3 allocation to the investment bank to the other way around. Only 1/3 to the investment bank and 2/3 to the other businesses. So we took down, from the crisis, the balance sheet went from 2.4 trillion Swiss francs. When I took over, it was already at 1.7, 1.8. It's not right now half. It's around 900. We took down the so-called risk-weighted assets, the measure of by half since I took over. So we transformed the balance sheet of the bank, and so that was a top-down decision. So, of course, it was not easy, because when you talk about leadership and getting people to follow you, you can imagine the people that were working in the investment bank and also in wealth management. The wealth management people went through a quite incredible situation. You can imagine having $2 trillion of clients' assets. You go through a near-death experience, and only 2% of your clients close the account and transfer the money, and close the account and don't want to do anything to do with you. And only 10% of the assets leaves the bank. It was a miracle. but was a testament that clients were supportive, loyal, and appreciated what we were doing. So, but I went through this near-death experience, so it was quite traumatic. The investment banking colleagues were going through the dimension of thinking that they were working for a bank that had an aspiration to be the largest and most successful investment banking in the world. And all of a sudden they were told, you are important, but only if you can create value for shareholders and for clients. And we're not going to measure you based on how big you are or how broad you are. So it was a clear shock to the system. So we went through in phases convincing also the external stakeholders, shareholders and clients, that we were serious about executing this strategy. So when I announced the strategy in November 11, was all about setting the standards to be measured, myself and my team, on how each quarter they could see if we were serious about making progress. Because I needed also myself to demonstrate that I was serious about it. Well, my credibility was also at stake. So, in a nutshell, you go through that, and after 2 quarters, we were gaining some good momentum. So, for the first time in a few years, we realized that we were able to accelerate the transformation of the bank in a position of control, i.e. not having to make changes because an external factors or a problem was affecting us, but rather because we were in control. So we decided to announce after 9 months, 10 months, I announced that we were accelerating the strategy, the implementation of the strategy. And the most important issue at that point in time was that clients and our employees embraced the strategy immediately. Of course, shareholders reacted favorably, and that created a self-fulfilling momentum. So, and from that point in time, I think, I went long, but only to explain you that part of the equation was not about creating too much consensus. Actually, the real issue was always to keep all these strategic decisions in a very tight environment.